Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Um, Angular in 2025 with Minko Getchev. As we step a new era of web development, Angular continues to evolve, bring a new feature, improved performance, and a better developer experience. Today, we are thrilled to have Minko Getchev with us
Getchev.
as we
Okay.
step a new era of web development. Angular
Okay. One
continues
minute.
to and okay. Okay, sorry. So get ready for exciting session filled with valuable insights and the chance to ask your question. Let's dive in. You can
All
start.
right. All right. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Minko, and I'm lead for Angular at Google. Today, I'm going to share with you some of our plans for this year, for 2025. And before we do that, though, I would like to share more about what we have shipped over the past couple of years because Angular has been on a roll. We have been having like a pretty fast moving momentum with new features, new improvements in the framework. The community has been also picking up momentum, and people overall have been calling this the Angular Renaissance. So pretty excited to share this with you. The talk today would be kind of on a high level. We're not going to dig too deep into individual features, but if you have questions about these features, please make sure you ask them in the chat. I would cover things on a high level so that we can cover more ground. So we can cover things across the Angular framework, Angular CLI, server-side rendering, even components. All right. So when I was preparing for this particular talk, I was reflecting back to 2016, which was the year when Angular 2 was released. I was thinking that my most bright memories from 2016 were like everyone playing Pokemon Go. That was just Pokemon Go was on the rise. And there were two significant milestones that happened in this year. As I mentioned, the release of Angular 2 and also my relocation from Bulgaria, where I'm originally from, to the United States. And it was a pretty rough transition for me, particularly because, well, I didn't know anyone in the United States, and for a very warm welcome, even when I tried to take money from the ATM so I can buy myself food at the airport, my debit card didn't work. And I couldn't access my bank account. So I started going to each individual like ATM I could find in the area trying to get money, and nothing really worked. I didn't know anyone in the Bay Area in the United States. I didn't have money. I just had a place to sleep for a couple of nights, and I was getting nervous. So at some point, when I was starving around 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning, jet lagged, I decided to send money to myself with Western Union. And that's the original format I filled. And you can see I'm the receiver here and I'm the sender. So when the Western Union office saw that, they thought it's a scam. They didn't end up giving me the money. So it was a pretty tricky situation for a bit. But in the meantime, I was very focused on delivering value to the community and shipping a lot of code. I was pushing a lot of code on GitHub. I was working very hard on my startup. And I was going through this transition from Bulgaria to the United States. There was something similar happening with Angular in this period of time. Angular was going from this transition from AngularJS to Angular. And it was pretty rough for the team as well. The team was shipping a lot too, a new router, lazy loading, material design components, observables, functional reactive programming, web worker support, so much stuff. And it was hard for the team to figure out what is the exact minimal scope for the framework so that they can finally deliver it. Now, the world is different. It's 2025. I built my community in the United States. I have friends now. I know people around, and I have access to my bank account, which is great. I can buy myself food. And Angular at the same time is going through a renaissance. So what happened between 2016 and 2025? Well, a lot of things. And actually, there is a really interesting story in the Angular documentary that was released just a couple of months ago. where you can learn everything about the original launch of Angular all the way to the Angular Renaissance that is still going. I was trying to distill that though to a few major lessons, which were in fact very shared with my story, with my transition from Bulgaria and the United States to the United States as well. And these lessons were like setting the correct boundaries. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, building relationships, and learning and iterating. These were very important in the development of Angular and also myself. So setting boundaries. Let's start with this one because that was the one that I found to be the least intuitive. So I was originally thinking, when we talk about boundaries, I was originally thinking of just setting borders between Angular and its developers, people using it, or setting boundaries between me and the people I love, which doesn't necessarily work that way. Just the boundaries, they were not to be rigid or uncaring. They're about honoring your own needs and limits so that you can provide the love that others deserve. And that's both valid for me and the people around me and for Angular and all the developers using it. Let me show you how we set boundaries for Angular. So first of all, we defined a very clear vision for what Angular is, and we set clear expectations so that developers know where we're heading. Originally, Angular was defined as one framework for mobile and desktop, which is confusing because it's actually a web framework and it's not even mentioned in the tagline. So what we did was to change the website, change the messaging, and instead focus on delivering web apps with confidence. And that's just the tagline. This is just what we are striving for, what Angular is for. From there, we can break this down into many different elements and kind of can drive our agenda, our roadmap forward. Managing feature requests was a big one because we would receive, as you can imagine, dozens of feature requests every day. And we can keep collecting them and have thousands of open feature requests. And we would eventually may want to ship some of them because they are a good idea. And we don't want to close feature requests that people open because we're thinking, well, one day we may want to implement that. And it may feel disrespectful to close a feature request that someone took the time to report, to ask for. Well, but this way we were collecting hundreds, even thousands of feature requests. And we're a small team. We're about 20, 25 people. We can't respond to all of these feature requests and keep developers up to date with the current status or with our plan for implementing them. So what ended up happening is developers would open their feature requests and they will not hear from us, which would actually feel even worse compared to closing them, because what is happening? Like I requested this feature, but you didn't even like respond to me. Am I gonna see it ever in the framework? So we ended up seeing a lot of community dissatisfaction. That was in the period around 2020 when people were really dissatisfied with the way we were engaging in their feature requests. So we changed that. We introduced the feature request management process, which added some level of automation. We included a voting process, and we were significantly more prompt in responding to feature requests. So we would very clearly define what belongs to the scope of the framework and what doesn't. And this way, we managed to reduce the total issues with over 50%, which helped us to better communicate with developers also what they should be expecting from Angular and whether we're going to address their feature requests or not, and whether they're a better fit for a community extension instead. So that's one of the things which kind of allowed us to set clear expectations or clear boundaries. These are the boundaries of the product. This is what the product consists of. And based on what is the philosophy of the product, we can decide whether certain features belong to Angular or they're a better fit for a community extension. Now, building relationships is an important one. It's very critical if you're building a product to build relationships with relevant parties. Same as if you're working as an engineer, you like to build relationships with like-minded engineers, with your coworkers, so that you can all work together and you make sure that you're focused on a shared goal. Specifically for Angular, we built a lot of relationships within the team. which was important to make sure that we are focused, we are aligned on what problems we're solving. Instead of everyone solving their own problem, we are fixated on making Angular the best framework we can. We are building relationships with other teams at Google, for instance. Let's say Firebase or the Gemini team. We're also working closely with teams outside of Google. Cypress with Narwhal or NX. We're working with Playwright, Puppeteer, Ionic, and many others. So building these relationships and maintaining them, it's really important for us. Building relationships with community members is really critical as well, because there are a lot of folks out there who just want to grow the Angular community, organizing meetups like the one today, or contributing with open source, building their own modules. We would like to maintain and cherish these relationships. Also, relationships with other framework authors. We have been talking very frequently to Evan New from Vue. We've been talking to people from the React team, folks from the Svelte team. Solid has been a great framework that we have had very close relationship with. And that way we're focused on improving web development for everyone instead of like competing, which is pretty overall good for the overall ecosystem. All right, so that was about the first two lessons. Now, learning and iterating. Here, I would like to focus more on how are we building your the features that people request and how are we evolving the framework. So there is this idea in the engineering community about the 10x or the genius programmer, where you have an idea about certain technology and you just go in your basement and you implement it and it's the perfect technology and it's going to live forever. Well, that's not how really things work in practice, because things are so complicated that first of all, one person can't really deliver anything too meaningful. And second of all, just it's a moving target, the perfect technology. So you need to be taking small steps towards it instead of one big jump and missing the target. So the way we're developing Angular is gathering a lot of requirements first. Just want to make sure that we're solving real problems that developers are facing. And we're solving these real problems we're gathering these requirements with interviews, just talking to developers, building web apps with Angular. We're collecting a lot of feedback from GitHub and social media, a lot of feedback from in-person conversations, industry and business trends, just looking at what is happening in the JavaScript ecosystem, and also running surveys. Now, we have gathered all this huge amount of feedback. It could be in the form of just a spreadsheet with all the different features, high-level features that developers want to see. Now we would need to prioritize them, and after that, start executing on them. Let's say we have decided that we would like to work on a major feature, something like selectorless. I'll talk more about that project in a little bit. The first step out of all of them would be just to do some prototyping. We would like to see whether this feature is actually even feasible and to understand how complicated it is to build it. From there, we're running requests for comments on RFC. With the request for comments, we share our learnings during the prototyping stage with the community. And from there, we gather a lot of feedback on whether developers like this feature, how do they respond to the API that we're proposing, and what can we do. And here we decide what we can do to improve it even further. From requests for comments, we often go to prototyping again to address the community feedback. After that, we do user studies. So we would give an assignment to developers that we have hired and ask them to complete particular assignment with this new feature. And we'll see how easy it is for this feature to use. We're going to gather a lot of feedback there too, and we're going to ship the feature in developer preview, where for 6 months at least, we will be observing how developers are using this feature and decide whether we want to move forward with it, or we would like to implement any specific changes. We're doing a lot of validation in this stage, and finally, we're graduating into stable. So you can see that we go through a lot of steps for the major features in Angular. And for the smaller ones, we just are very intentional, deciding whether they belong to Angular scope or not. Now, following this process, we shipped quite a few features. Standalone components in version 14, faster builds with ESBuild and Vite in version 15, signals in version 17, deferrable views, control flow, and branch refresh in version 17, zoneless in version 18, and incremental hydration in our last release. And that's only the major features that we shipped, though. There are hundreds of other improvements, from security to server-side rendering, better developer ergonomics, and more. So that's how we transformed Angular to a more modern framework. And now I'd like to specifically focus on the features that we shipped in version 19. Specifically, incremental hydration that is focused specifically on the most performance demanding use cases, such as granular, lazy loading, hydration, and would like to also discuss server route configuration and reactivity. First, let's look at incremental hydration, and I have a demo for you right here. I assume you see my screen already here and you see the demo. So that's an app that we built an e-commerce inspired application. And by default, this app is grayed out. You can see that it is black and white without any color, which means that we have just rendered it on the server and the client has taken the HTML, the CSS, went through rendering of this whole thing without loading any JavaScript, which means that the initial render of the page is really fast. And when we interact with the page, we're going to download only the JavaScript associated with this particular part of the page, which will be pretty powerful because we don't have to download the rest of the JavaScript. We download only the minimum amount of JavaScript that is responsible for handling a particular user interaction. So let's say I click on the search bar. You can see that this part of the page became interactive. If I hover this part of the page, it also became interactive. Same here and here. Now, if I go to Chrome DevTools and zoom in a little bit, I'll go to network here. All right, you can see that when I click on the search bar, we downloaded a bunch of JavaScript, but close to 80 kilobytes of JavaScript. And this is the JavaScript responsible for handling like search queries. You can see that it works here. Shows us different things. If I hover during this part of the page, we download the JavaScript associated only with it. So this is in contrast to traditional hydration, where we would load the application. And when we load the application, we download also all the JavaScript associated with it. So in order to perform an interaction with the app, we'll have to load for all the JavaScript to load. And this wait time could be a lot depending on the amount of JavaScript we have on the page. However, with incremental hydration, we need to wait only the amount of time that is required to download the JavaScript associated with the component that we're interacting with. That is significantly faster. All right, so that's incremental hydration. And the cool thing about it is that it is built on top of a primitive that we shipped in version 17 called deferrable views. With incremental hydration, though, we use hydrate on particular trigger. That's when you hydrate the calendar component here. Otherwise, the user would just see the calendar component but would not be able to interact with it. However, on idle, Angular is going to download the JavaScript associated with this component and hydrate it. That's it. Now let's talk about render modes. This is a fine-grained way for you to configure how individual routes in your application should be rendered by Angular. Here it is. So we have a server route config. We have the individual routes in our application, and we specify for each one of them. Let's say login, we would like to render on the server or do server-side rendering. For the dashboard, we would like to render it on the client, and we would like to pre-render the individual products. That's pretty much how this works. Previously, before this functionality, you had to do that in angular.json with specifying some text files. It was definitely not as easy as it is here in version 19. This is in comparison to some more implicit route rendering configuration strategies in Next.js, for example. This provides a lot of flexibility, and it is a very explicit way to do that. Now, there are also some reactivity primitives. If you have been building with Angular lately, I'm sure you have heard about signal queries, signal inputs, the new outputs that we have, and also modo inputs. They're all now stable as of version 19, and you can, in fact, update to them by using schematics. So if you would like to use signal inputs, queries, or the new outputs, just run these schematics, and Angular will move your application to these new APIs as much as it can. Based on how you're using the previous outputs and inputs, some migrations, some updates might not be entirely possible, so you may want to update them by hand because the new inputs, for example, they are read-only, and the previous inputs weren't, so there is this mismatch. The new inputs are a little bit more restrictive. All right. Another exciting thing is that YouTube is currently using Angular signals via Wiz. Wiz is the other internal framework that we have at Google. And they're seeing significant improvements with Wiz using signals. They saw 35% better input latency on low-end devices. This is on a smart TV. So imagine getting 35% faster application if you're running it on a smart TV, which respectively gets really well translated to the browser as well. In the reactivity space, we shipped a new API called linked signal that you can think about it as a writable compute in a way. See here, we have a signal of an array of options. So we have apple, banana, and fig, and we have a linked signal, which as default value has the first value of the options signal. So it has apple. So that's the initial value. However, compared to computed, here we can set the value of the choice, and we can override it to be fig here. When we set the options again, since the options, the linked signal is completely dependent on the options, we override the value again. So this resets the value for the linked signal. This primitive, we found it to be useful exactly in this case when you have these options and you'd like to create dependency between the options and the value that you have selected. It is a pretty neat abstraction. We found use cases for it across Angular and Wiz, so that's something that you can use today. We also shipped something called resource. And actually, there are updates for resource that we delivered over the past couple of weeks. But let me first focus on what resource is. So our resource is our abstraction that we use for interacting with signals and incorporating asynchronous behavior. So here we have a resource that depends on the user ID. The user ID here is a signal of type number. So whenever we update the user ID, we would call the loader, which would get the user for this particular ID. That's pretty much how it works. When the value of the user ID changes, we're going to call the loader again. And as you can see, this could be very handy for HTTP requests as well. So that's how we shipped kind of experimental version of our HTTP resource that is based on this exact same abstraction using the HTTP client under the hood. I'll recommend you to go to GitHub and check the RFC there, where we described everything in details. Yeah, there is more that we shipped in version 19, such as a time picker, unused import removal, schematics, HMR, and more. Now, let us look into Angular in 2025, which was the topic of this presentation. I shared the Angular 2025 strategy a couple of months ago, where I go through the developer feedback that we received over the past year and described what exactly we're going to do in order to address it. If we look at it, the main opportunities are around component altering formats, initial load time performance in UI components. That's what this graph symbolizes. On the right, there are the strengths of Angular. And if we look up, here we can find opportunities, what developers find important and what developers what is underperforming compared to what we would expect. So on the right, this is the performance score, how important particular feature is. It's on the y-axis. So in 2025, we'll be focusing specifically on improving developer experience and enabling adoption. So on improving developer experience, making Angular zoneless is probably number one feature that we're going to address. And we're in the process of shipping this. So we have experimental zoneless support, and we're kind of polishing the latest details there. We are looking into addressing issues such as uh, errors during server-side rendering and overall error handling without Zone.js, because Zone.js had this incredible feature that it can catch all the errors that are happening inside of your application, because it kind of can plug itself into the microtask and the task queue in your browser. So any error that happens in your application, Zone.js can happen, and your application would not necessarily crash. However, with zoneless, it's not as trivial. Error handling during server-side rendering is not as trivial, so we would like to polish the edges. And in version 20, we're going to release, most likely, developer preview of zoneless. Zoneless is going to provide faster initial rendering, better developer experience, because you're not going to have these cryptic stack traces, whereas Zone.js is part of most of them. Improve interop, and also provides a better alignment with the web platform. Now, bootstrapping application with zoneless would be as simple as provide experimental zoneless change detection, and respectively in version 20, we're most likely going to drop this experimental prefix right here. So it is going to be provide zoneless change detection. Signal forms is another massive feature that we're working on. You know that historically we've had template-driven and reactive forms. It has been often confusing for developers which one should they use. And unfortunately, none of them really integrates well with signals as well. So we're designing a new forms module that is aiming to address all the feedback that we received throughout the years about template-driven and reactive forms. And additionally, this with signals in its core, so it'll be significantly easier for developers to use. Expect updates in 2025. Can't tell you exactly when we're going to ship it, because we want to make sure we make a lot of good design decisions there. And the design process is taking a while. It's not going to be a lot of code writing. It's going to be mostly thinking about what developer experience we want to provide. Unit testing is another big one. Probably you know that Karma got deprecated, and we're transitioning now to most likely V-test, because we're already using Vite, and V-test provides some fantastic support for browser testing, and we'd like to make sure that it also could be used with Jasmine. This is also coming most likely in version 20. We're still exploring the trade-offs between V-test and Jest, but a major benefit for V-test is the browser testing that I mentioned, and also it has really good support model at the moment. It is behind Evan News company Void Zero. All right, I actually mentioned HTTP resource already. That's an abstraction that you can already use today. Just please give it a try and let us know what you think. I believe the RFC might be still open on Angular's GitHub repository. Cool. Now, I'd like to spend the last couple of slides talking about selectorless and authoring format, because that's one of the main things that I wanted to really shift when I joined the team, and that was already 6 years ago. The first one is I'm sure you're all aware of these duplicated imports, right? We have an import in main.ts, we're importing mat button and tooltip, and we're additionally importing them in the app component, which seems redundant and unnecessary. Well, we're doing that so that we can let the framework know that there are components and directives with specific selectors that are available inside of the template of this component. And this is kind of a legacy thing that dates back to ng modules. Well, we don't really need to do that with standalone components though. So we're working towards a feature called selectorless that would allow you to replace this right here with this. You see the difference? So instead of having this redundant imports array, we'll be able to directly use the components from the lexical scope of the module in which the component is declared, and makes things significantly simpler. This has its own kind of tricky things. So we're going to spend some good amount of time designing it, making sure that we have a solid design of the feature before we ship on RFC and request feedback from the community. I'm expecting to hear for us to publish updates about this feature sometime this year. Probably on RFC in the first half of the year and potentially shipping this feature in the second half of the year. But since we're talking about altering format, selectors, it's kind of a no-brainer because it's just a low-hanging fruit opportunity after we shipped standalone components. However, there are other things that we can potentially improve. Now with signals, you don't really need all the lifecycle hooks of the components, for example. Also, there might be a way for us to better reference JavaScript symbols such as enums in templates, because currently there is no really easy way. In order to use an enum in a template, you have to assign it to a property inside of your component and reference it that way. We would additionally want to improve the usability of TypeScript inside of Angular templates. So this is what got us thinking, most likely we would like to revamp the whole altering experience of Angular. Now, this is very early on. I'm just talking about it because I like to make sure that the community is prepared that something is coming in the next 2 years, but we're not really going to ship anything uh, this year. We're just going to do some very early prototyping and planning. There is already some prototyping that is happening in the community. For example, Analog.js, they ship their single file component format. And a lot of people love it. So we have been looking into some ideas, potentially exploring function components, single file components, or an alternative version of class components that has some of the benefits of the altering format that we see in the future. Now, none of this is anything concrete still. This is just very early brainstorming on our side. But just wanted to give you a heads up that that's something that we're strongly considering right now, like really thinking about. Still, moving the entire ecosystem to a new altering format is going to take years, and designing it is going to take even years. So it is still far away, but just be ready and make sure you follow us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and GitHub to hear about updates. All right. It has been also great to see all the community conferences. So we had 10 conferences last year. We have new conferences this year. We already had NG Venice for the first time. The community is back to normal after COVID, which is great to see. And I'm really happy to be here with you today as well. Now, between 2025 and 2032, or I don't know, 2035, there are a few things that we'll be really paying really close attention on, and they are performance, developer experience, and stability and reliability. These are really critical for us. Angular back in 2016 looks very similar to what Angular looks today, and you can actually write, and like if you're an Angular 2 developer, you're also an Angular version 19 developer. Like really, these versions mean nothing more than just the framework is getting better, but it is still compatible. It is still uses very similar APIs that we maintained and ensure a transition to their modern versions over the years. So stability is critical for us. At the same time, we're advancing a lot in developer experience and investing in performance. But still, we're going to do that while still keeping the three lessons that I mentioned at the beginning in mind. Setting boundaries, making sure what really the scope of Angular is, having well-defined scope so that Angular can continue to be a reliable choice for everyone in the next 10 years from now. Building relationships and learning and iterating. All right, that's everything I had. And yeah, we have at least 20 minutes for questions.
Yeah, well, mm, now chat. Uh, we don't have any questions yet, but I hope in this week or tomorrow it will be soon. Okay, so it's very amazing the planning in 2025 and then the next of roadmap of Angular. So we can and okay, let's bring us to end of our session of Angular 2025. Huge thanks to Minko Gechev for sharing his expertise and shedding light of the future of Angular. We hope you found this session insightful, and we are excited to explore the latest advancement in Angular. Keep experimenting, stay engaged with the community, and let's continue building amazing application. If you have any further question or you want to continue discussion, feel free to connect us. Thank you for all being here, and see you at the next meetup. Thank you.
Bye.
So I will. Okay. Yeah, I think we